third-party website. If you click on the link below, it brings up a page where the captions will appear. So you can have the Zoom window open and the captions window open side by side. If you have any trouble, just let us know. So yeah, as you're coming in, I think there's still people coming in. Just a reminder to keep your cameras and audio off. It's just to keep sound quality and sort of visual clutter at a minimum. I think that might be everyone here, so we're sort of good to start. Yeah, as I was saying, instructions to access are sort of in the chat. There's details of how to pin BSL interpreters and how to access the captioning link as well. And then just to go through some house rules as well, which should be posted into the chat soon as well. But the main one is if you have a question, we're not going to be taking questions during the presentation. So just type it in the chat, preface it with the letter Q, just so you know it's a question. And what we'll do is we'll take all your questions and we'll bring them into the discussion at the end, which leads us nicely onto, I suppose, what the event is. So you're welcome to make it accessible 5. Beyond Scotland is sort of the title of this event. And the aim with this is that we've invited some artists, and I'm really thrilled to say we've got 4 artists with huge depth and longevity of experience of making work, and both in international contexts, and there's some artists who are based in Scotland. We'll be talking about touring their work internationally and how that's impacted upon their work and how their work impacts on communities they go to. But yes, I'm super thrilled to have everyone here. The way it'll work is we'll have 2 presentations followed by a short break. Then another 2 presentations. Each presentation is about 15 minutes long, and then we'll have a sort of midway point break, and we'll come back for a sort of a discussion group, which ask everyone to turn their cameras on, turn their mics on if they feel comfortable, and we can just chat about what questions the presentation might raise, anything that's interesting. It's a chance to ask the presenters particular questions if you like, or we want to sort of keep the focus on getting everyone to discuss the sort of knowledge and expertise that's been shared with us, which is brilliant. So yeah, alongside me is Judy Thrake. So I'll let Jude sort of introduce herself, but each one of these events, Birds of Paradise, have been sort of taking it in turns, I guess, to co-host this event with me. I haven't even said who I am. I'm Andy. I'm a playwright and dramaturg based in Glasgow, but I'll let Jude introduce herself.
Thanks, Andy. I'm really excited to be here and see all these amazing and hear all these amazing presentations and the discussion. So I've worked with BOP on a variety of projects, including as a disabled performer, an academic theatre consultant, working on My Left Right Foot, and I'm currently working on a disability and culture timeline as part of Birds of Paradise disability equality training. And I'm also doing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh on European theatre, focusing on Scottish disability theatre. So I use she and her, and fair skin, red curly-ish hair, and red glasses, and I'm an electric wheelchair user. So back to you, Andy.
Brilliant, thank you. I use he and his. I'm white-skinned. I'm wearing sort of tortoiseshell glasses and have brown hair as well. So what we'll do first is just say thank you to all our presenters who are, some of them joining us from different time zones, some of them speaking in non-native languages. And so there's a considerable amount of energy and sort of expertise and effort that's gone into them being here today. So just thank you to them, and just thank you to the interpreters, Yvonne and Catherine, and our 2 captioners as well, Francis and Laura, for their efforts and their work. But without any further ado, our first presenter is Chisato Minamimura. She is a deaf performance artist and British Sign Language art guide. Today, Chisato will talk about her current digital solo performance project, Scored in Silence, which unpacks the untold tales of deaf survivors of the A-bombs in Japan in 1945. So since featuring as part of the British Council's Edinburgh Showcase in 2019, this performance, Scored in Silence, has toured to venues and festivals in Canada and Tunisia, and has recently made its digital world premiere in collaboration with the Chilean Arts Centre, GAM. So yeah, Chisato, if you're able to turn on your camera and we'll get started with your presentation. Myself and Judith will turn ours off. And yeah, if you have any questions, just give us a shout.
And thanks so much. I'm a Japanese short black, and at the moment I'm wearing a red long sleeved top and a black tunic over the top of it. So at the moment I'm living in London, and I'm a deaf artist, artistic director. I'm a performer, and I'm also a deaf art guide in museums and galleries. I'm so pleased to come here today to talk about the work that I've been doing, which is a digital performance piece called Scored in Silence. Now, to give you a little bit of context on that, in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, there were 2 A-bombs dropped. So in my country, in Japan. And many, many, many people were killed or were left suffering. And from those people, it was the deaf people who had experienced this, who'd survived the bomb, that I wanted to collect stories from and create a piece of work that would honour that. And from that came Scored in Silence. So I'm going to show you a very short trailer clip of it. It's only 1 minute. So that gives you a little glimpse into some of the elements that were used in the piece. So there was movement, BSL, sign mime, visual vernacular, animation, photography, filming, and projection onto a screen. The kind of screen I used was a hologauze, it's called, a hologauze. This is a particular type of technology that allows a 2D image to be created, recreated as a 3D image. I also had a very specific soundscape, which came from a sonic artist. And we used this equipment to offer this to the audience. This is a Woodger belt, a Woodger strap. I had around 50 of those straps that I was able to tour with and offer to the audience. So 50 people in the audience, whether they were deaf or hearing, that wasn't an issue. It was offered to anyone in the audience who wanted to experience the sonic soundscape from with a felt and embodied experience. It was very effective. I also offered audio description as part of the production for anyone who was visually impaired in the audience. So the access that we offered was artistically grounded. So each of these elements came from the practice of a deaf artist. They were very much deaf elements because they were grounded in a very strong visual sense. And the question, I suppose, then is how you create these deaf elements. And what's really important for me is the phrase deaf-led. And for some people, that isn't automatically a clear phrase. What that means, though, is that I led the project as a deaf artist, and that communication between myself and the hearing team was very clear. And what was very important for us was to have BSL interpreters to assist that communication. But what we were very clear about also was, and that the interpreter was very aware of, that this was a deaf-led piece of work. It's very easy for hearing people to fall into the trap of working with the interpreter and seeing the interpreter as someone who's leading this, but actually it was always about throwing that back to me, that I was the one who led the project. And that was the same for my producer. Tom Kreis was my producer, sorry. His sign name is almost skeleton or on the chest here. And he was very, very aware that this had to be a deaf-led production. And that had to be honour the culture of deaf people, and that I, Chisato, was the one who was in charge of it. And he helped mediate that message between myself and the creative team, between myself and the venues. He kept communication going, which meant that we were a very solid team, and it was a very valuable relationship to have. And we worked together as a great team to get this production made. And there was learning within the team about what it meant to be a deaf-led production. Now, one of the examples I'll give you for that is the sonic artist we worked with had never worked with a deaf artist before. So we made sure that we had lots of discussions, very deep and detailed discussions, so that we were both on the same page about what I wanted as an artist for the piece. And that was a very fruitful relationship. I've shown Scored in Silence across the UK. I've shown it in Brighton. We toured to Manchester at the Science Festival there, and I also went to London at the Oval House in London. And thanks to the British Council, I was also invited to take part as the Edinburgh Fringe Showcase last year too. And then unfortunately COVID-19 locked us down, and the tour had to stop. But what I'm really hoping is that once we move past this, I'll be able to go back to the tour and finish it throughout the UK. So hopefully I'll see you there. And if you're interested in having me come to your venue, please get in touch. I also toured the piece internationally. I toured it to Canada and to Tunisia. And there was a great deal of learning in touring to those two countries. So for example, in Tunisia, we went to a very, very large festival called the Carthage Days Festival. And they gave us a schedule for our get-in and our tech and getting on the stage. But the festival was massive. I mean, it was a very, very, very big festival with very tight turnarounds. And you had to have the ability to adapt. So we went to Tunis to perform. And then we had to go to Sofx as well. And so we travelled from Tunis, and I drove, although for the whole morning we drove down south to Sofx. And we did all the get-in, the technical team set it all up and everything. But one of the great difficulties then that occurred was we were delayed in that, so we couldn't do exactly as we wanted to at the time we needed to do. We had to wait, and we were supposed to get into the theatre in the afternoon. It was midnight before we actually managed to get the setup. But thankfully, the team that I had around about me were adaptable, flexible, highly skilled, and very open. And what was really important for us at that point was the incredible people of the festival, the local festival, who also offered their assistance. And we worked together as a great team to make this adaptation work for ourselves. When I toured in Canada, Scored in Silence often had a Q&A after it, which was a very popular thing to do. And we did that in Tunisia as well. And in Canada, what happened was the performance finished and I took my bow, and then I headed backstage to change out of my costume in order to come back for the Q&A. Now, while I was doing that, the technical team put the Q&A in motion and got the interpreter together, seated ready for me when I came in. So she was sitting opposite me, so she was in the audience. But when I came in, it kind of started, so I just sat next to the BSL interpreter to wait for a chance to go and sit on the panel. And someone from the audience said, "Oh, I love this piece. Can you tell me who was the lead artist in this? Who really made this happen?" And all eyes went to the technical team. All eyes went to this technical crew, to the team that we had. And my producer that I previously had, Sarah, and she not Tom, but Sarah, she simply made the eyes turn and say it was Chizato's piece of work. This is her production. And that caused a bit of a shock in the audience, actually. And a Canadian deaf woman who was in the audience said, "So that means if Chizato can do it, and she's deaf, Canadian deaf artists can do this as well." And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely we can do this." So that was a really nice moment. In Tunisia, when I performed in Tunis, in the city, at the festival, they asked me to be a part of a panel. And so I was kind of on the end of this panel, and I was the only deaf or disabled artist on the panel. The chairperson introduced each of the panel members and then came to me and said, "And this is Chisato Minamimura, who is imprisoned in her own deafness." That's quite a shocking thing to say, and I was quite shocked by it. But I thought, okay, that tells me where Tunisia is in terms of how they see deaf people, that they see deaf or disabled people in a very patronising way. But I carried on the panel, I did my job, I did what I was asked to do. And at the end of the session, the chairperson actually approached me and said, "I really want to apologise for my remarks. I have learned a great deal from this panel, and I was mistaken in what I said." And I thought that's really interesting, but these are some of the experiences I've had, and I think it's really made me think that art is an incredible way of allowing deaf and disabled people to show, to represent themselves as they truly are, to tell people that they can do this, and that stereotypes, which we are vulnerable to, don't have to be the way they are. We can change them. And that's quite a revolutionary thing to think, I think. It's a valuable experience that I've had. Now that we're living in COVID times, obviously, and it has now been 75 years since the end of the Second World War, and we're hitting that anniversary now, I really wanted to show, as a mark of respect to that anniversary, this performance that I'd made. But that was difficult because I couldn't do live performances. Now, thankfully, we had recorded the entire performance with English subtitles and audio description, but we hadn't actually put it on live stream yet, but we had it. So on the 6th of August in Hiroshima, in a Memorial Day for Hiroshima, I was able to show it on a 24, extracts from it on a 24-hour loop, thanks to an unlimited micro grant. And in Chile, at the Centre GAM, I was able to show the entire performance on a 24-hour screening as well. And the subtitles were in Spanish at that point. Now, actually, we showed that on a really important day for Chile, because in 1973, on September the 11th, they had a coup d'etat, and it was a really bloody day for them. And so that was their Memorial Day as well. So it was a very important day to have that shown. On the 9th and 10th of November, the piece will be shown in full in Korea at their festival, at one of their festivals, and the subtitles will be in Korean. And then on the 11th of November, which is Remembrance Day in the UK, I'm going to show the piece on a 24-hour screening, and there will also be 2 Q&A sessions as well. And our creative team and myself will be there ready to have conversations with people about the piece and about what we're talking about. So if you're interested in joining us, we would love to see you. So thank you very much for watching my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chizato. That was amazing. Thank you. So without further ado, we will move on to Paula Souza Lopez, and she is a Brazilian performer and audio describer, producer.
Jude, sorry to interrupt. Poor Paula has lost her internet connection.
Oh no!
I've just had a message from her. So it may be that we need, if somebody else would be prepared to present next, that would be wonderful. I'm just going to keep liaising with Paula, and I'm going to disappear to the background. Sorry to lob that out.
No, thank you very much for holding that up. Andy?
Yeah, of course. Claire, would you be all right to step forward and present, and then we'll just switch the order, so we'll do Claire and then Paula after that. For real. So one little second. So thank you, Claire, for joining. For those of you who don't know, Claire Cunningham is and creator of multiple disciplinary performance based in Glasgow here in Scotland. Claire's one of the UK's most acclaimed and sort of internationally renowned disabled artists. Recent work includes Thank You Very Much, which premiered in July 2019 at Manchester International Festival. And today, Claire will be sharing her thoughts and sort of considerations on touring accessible work internationally. So without any further ado, I'll fade into the background, and Claire, after you.
Can we just give a wee second? Is that okay? Yeah, there.
Yeah, hi there, sorry. I'm setting a timer because I'm notorious for running long, so. Are we all good? Yeah. Great. Too many things on my screen, sorry. Okay, hi, yes, my name is Claire Cunningham. I'm a self-identifying disabled performer and choreographer based in Scotland, and I'm speaking today from my home just outside Glasgow. I am a short, white, queer woman in her 40s with short dark hair with streaks of grey, and I'm wearing clear rimmed glasses. I have constant companions in my two grey UK-style elbow crutches. Kind of just see them in the corner hanging out. And today I'm wearing a bright blue and grey woolen jumper with kind of geometric patterns and jeans. I've been doing a lot of talking and presenting recently to other disabled artists in other countries over Zoom since the start of the pandemic. And so I'm kind of in that mode of speaking. And so I'm going to continue today mainly in that mode. My development and my emergence as an artist, and particularly as a maker, is very specific to living in Scotland due to the support I've had to be able to develop, grow and make work. However, I tour almost exclusively out with the UK, as sadly, the interest and enthusiasm for my work in the UK, apart from a few key partners, is quite low. Whereas there's been an ongoing interest for many years in my work from other countries. This interest is often related to my performance work being presented as part of local attempts to shift awareness of the potential of disabled artists in those countries. And I'm invited in to show work and to give workshops to share skills and experience with local disabled artists, or to be part of attempts to further dialogue about the status of work by disabled artists. So I guess that's one aspect of working internationally for me, is that quite often the work goes beyond just presenting a show. Quite often there are a number of other activities around that event, which goes part way towards places getting the most out of the artist that they've brought, getting their money's worth. But it also works both ways. For me, it also makes sense to try and spend more time in a place. Early on, I used to be doing a lot of doing one show and then going somewhere else, which is also a really particular problem in dance. It's incredibly tiring, and so partly through invitation to do more, and partly I also chose to expand what I do when I'm invited somewhere. I really hate the sort of drop in, do a show, fly out experience. For one, it's not very environmentally friendly, obviously, anymore, but also I began to want more opportunities to meet and engage with local artists, particularly disabled artists, and to build relationships with audiences and venues or programmers. I think it is increasingly important for venues to bring artists for substantial periods of time. The connections made to local communities are always more tangible and have more potential for ongoing relationships. It's important to work out the scheduling of those events, but for me, the show is always the priority in terms of my energy and my choices. We will often ensure that there are rest days scheduled within trips, and if journeys to arrive at a destination are very long, always ensuring that your technical crew have a rest day programmed after arrival, before they start work, because often they start work in the theatre at least a day before the artist. One of the key things I think about international touring is probably communication. Of course, one of the issues is how communication happens. And for deaf and disabled artists, this can be particularly difficult, trying to get non-disabled curators or programmers to understand that different ways of communicating may be necessary than they have been accustomed to. You might actually have to pick up a phone. Email is not right for everyone. Neither, of course, is the phone right for everyone. But actually, more importantly, beyond the initial method of communicating, I mean that they need to be specific about as much as possible. And my big motto for this, never assume anything. For example, what is considered step-free access by one person is really not for another. A suitable floor to dance on in one country may be really problematic for your work made in another country. Even the difference in climate may affect your work. So I found that a whole bunch of choreography made in Scotland on a rubber dance floor, when I took it to sort of sweltering temperatures in Australia, became almost impossible and needed time and attention because the floor was much softer and gripped differently. And my crutches stick to my arms in hot spaces. Climate affects choreography. It's a real thing. Other things, the distance to a hotel or the ease of commuting for one company may not work at all for another company. As much as possible, always be specific. Create access riders as well as technical riders for people and for the work and for your venue. Don't make the artist do all the work. Be very clear about conditions necessary for your work as an artist. For example, a wooden floor, not a concrete floor, dressing room on the same level, facilities to wash clothes or costumes. Never assume anything. Language is one of the main issues to pay attention to, I found, when touring internationally, from initial emails and confusion or misunderstanding there, to translation of actual content of a work in performance. We will often request that there is a translator or someone with good capacity to translate, working in the theatre with our technical staff where necessary for a get-in. And we also request a local liaison to be present with us who can assist in local knowledge, such as doing errands, and to be a personal assistant for me when necessary. The translation of content of a show or a script is also a complex process. It needs time and money. And as with sign language translation, I recommend that you pay attention to who is translating and what their experience is. I don't mean that so much in a professional capacity, but more about identity, community, and awareness of language. If you create work that has very specific and careful use of certain language or terminology, then do you want to know that the translation is also doing this? So for example, with Guide Gods, a show that I made about disability and faith, it's important to check with the sign language interpreter and the text translator that the words they are using in relation to different faiths, or indeed to aspects of disability, for example, are appropriate terms, and ideally from those communities themselves and not derogatory terms from the outside. This is also really relevant in lots of different aspects: gender, race, queerness, and so on, or even if your work is referencing very specific academic terminology, for example. It may seem at times that having embedded access might make work more adaptable to tour. However, there can be unexpected issues with embedded access within work when it comes to touring internationally. Firstly, that sign language obviously changes with every country. So if you have made a work with a sign language interpreter in it, they are probably not able to travel internationally with the work. It is also, speaking specifically from an English speaking experience, it's rare to find sign language interpreters in other countries who can go directly from English to the sign language of the country that you're in. Local interpreters may need to work from the local language supertitles. With audio description, we've encountered a few problems at times. For example, again, in Guide Gods, I embedded the audio description into the soundscape of the work so that everyone hears it. The English is translated live by a captioner for sighted audience members and those who follow captions comfortably. However, to create an audio translation for the audio description, when we took the work to Germany, this presented a series of questions. If we give German translation in headsets for this, what about all the rest of the text spoken in the show? If we create audio translation of all the text in the show, would it be just one person speaking it all? How would a visually impaired person get a sense of all the different voices and tones and characters? How difficult would it be to sit with a whole text translation playing in one ear while hearing the live English performance very close and all around you? Would this be a very satisfying experience for our visually impaired audience? If we pre-record it with different voices, it becomes an enormous project. How would we cue this to remain in sync with the live show? We had to eventually state that this show was only accessible to visually impaired audience members who had a good knowledge of English. The other main aspect about touring work, which is developed as accessible in one context or country to a different country, is time. In particular, you need to schedule time to work on the access every time, beforehand and in situ. Preparing and sending as much information in advance as possible for those providing local access. We create packs. And then on site, you may need to almost V-tech your show every time. Time to discuss and clarify in advance the aspects of your own access as an artist or the aspects of access for the audience that your work involves. This may not be common practice or even have ever happened before at the place you take your work to. It may need explaining to people. It will definitely take extra labour. So for example, you might state that you ideally don't want people who use wheelchairs to be sectioned into set places in a theatre, that you want them to have choice. Or that you want pre-boarding call for people who need extra time to be seated. Or that you require the show to be sign language interpreted and that this will be arranged and funded by the theatre. Or that the front of house staff will be asked to be specific and aware in terms of their language to disabled audience members. All of these things need time, either from the artist or from the company members that the artist trusts before the work arrives and when the work is in-house, and it needs time and commitment from the in-house staff. It is extra labour. It needs to be understood and treated as such by all parties. Budget for it on both sides. All these aspects require rehearsal. If you're planning to have translation with captions or super titles, you need to rehearse this. If you're having sign language interpretation, you need to rehearse. You need to rehearse lighting stakes with sign language interpreters and with your technical staff. You need to give your technical staff time to add, focus, and program lights into the design if it's not in every show. It's important to know that those providing access services, captions, AD, or sign language, may not have worked in a theatre environment before. You need to schedule time to meet them, talk over the work, your expectations, their questions, and then rehearse with them. You may have to compromise on some aspects in order to ensure their comfort. For example, they may not want to wear a costume or move about the stage, or they may not be allowed to actually without permission from their boss. I also lastly asked my producer, Nadia Diaz, if she had any thoughts or recommendations to pass on. So here's Nadia's thoughts. Most important from her perspective, in terms of taking work internationally, was to find out what festivals program and who programs them. And if your work is similar, whether that's in aesthetic or in politics, for example, to what they program, then flag this up to them. Nadia says that international programmers, in contrast to the UK, want to see a full run of the work. So, for example, like a camera shot from the back of the theatre, and to understand what you as an artist are about. Lastly, she points out a big administration point. So ensure you know how much to charge. So understand your own costs of taking a production out. What is your bottom line? To include everything: administration, bank charges, insurance, access costs, rehearsal costs, fees. Quote your fee and ask the presenter to cover all travel, accommodation, and per diems on top. Tell them exactly what you require. And she reiterates, don't assume anything. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. It was brilliant to hear, and so much knowledge to soak in, I think. What we're going to do now is just take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and sort of carry on. But so with the time now, it's 14:48. So if we can come back at 2 minutes to 3, we'll sort of keep on going. Thank you for your attendance so far. Cheers.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We all back? Yes. Everything good with you, Andy?
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
really enjoying it.
great. So we're very pleased to say that we have Paula back with us.
Can you hear me? Is it clear, my voice? Yeah?
Yes, it is.
Wow,
So I will just give your...
So this will last.
Sorry, Paula?
Cross your fingers so the internet connection will last.
Okay, fingers crossed. So I will give your brief introduction again. Paula Sousa Lopes is a Brazilian performer, audio describer, producer, cultural manager, and translator. Today, Paula will be asking the following questions. Can the new normal produce new opportunities to reach more audiences, or are new barriers emerging? who are the new possible allies, and after 8 years after the London Olympic Games and 4 years after Rio 2016, is disability perceived differently and how? So thank you, Paula.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, even with this internet that is not really trustable. But I'm really happy to be here. I am a woman on my 50s. I have my hair tied on a bun. And in Brazil, I am considered white. So I descend from a Latin origin, like Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. So I find myself a bit green. I'm wearing a top that has stripes on green and blue and white. And behind me, there's a little bit of my bed. And on my left behind me, there's a cupboard made of glass. So we can see inside a book called The Disabled Artists in Brazil by Nicole Somera. She's a researcher I wanted to bring to this conversation, talk a bit about her. And just behind me, the program for Princesinha Medrosa, the children's play we devised integrating sign language and audio description within the text, within the real text of the play. And there's also another striped book painted, and a photograph of me and my son and my nieces on the beach. Well, I think to answer we can't answer those questions. Those questions are just guiding me throughout this journey, especially this year. What I've noticed is that lots of disabled artists in Brazil who are not mainstream artists, who are still thriving, fighting to have their work recognized, or even to find conditions to develop their talents and begin a professional career. They are exchanging ideas more through WhatsApp's groups. They've created WhatsApp's groups and they created projects to bring to programmers who they have never been able to reach, such as SESC, for example, which is an institution in Brazil that funds a lot of the art and the cultural events. So these artists are gathering more, are talking more, are exchanging ideas, and as an ally, I can perceive that people are becoming stronger, more connected, and braver to break the barriers we've been facing. In general, in Brazil, we face a barrier within the arts sector. We face funding, lack of funding. This is the biggest, or it's a huge barrier we face. But on the other hand, these artists are not afraid of it, and they are connected and doing more. So this is something that gives me lots of hope, and it's something that stands out at the moment. At the same time, at the beginning of this year, lots of the public money were allocated to provide accessible resources to the general cultural sector. What happens is that money was allocated for live performances and live accessible resources, such as audio description, captions, or sign language interpretation, live sign language interpretation. Now, people in Brazil are having to make this work become digital content. So what is happening is that audio describers, for example, are not enough for all the work that suddenly appeared. We have more and more digital content with accessible resources popping up in every page of every main program. So this is really good news. I have some notes I've taken so I wouldn't forget anything, and I also wanted to be flexible, because listening to you and being here, exchanging these experiences is also affected by everyday events. These past days, I was involved, this past 3 weeks, I was involved in making 27 short videos accessible for the Opera of São Paulo. The opera is called Teatro Municipal de São Paulo. And I found myself thinking a lot about the integration of accessible resources. The more I create audio description or work with sign language interpreters, the more I find important that the whole chain of cultural producers, artists, understand about those resources. Because the logics of it face barriers when, for example, a filmmaker doesn't allow any sound space between sentences or between scenes, so we can audio describe minimally, like, you know, the least number of words, use the least number of words. Sometimes it's impossible, and we have then to create strategies so to make that piece accessible in other ways, not throughout the piece describing it. So another thing I've noticed is that comparing the way people voice or narrate the audio description, the more the artists, the actors learn about audio description, the more the audio description and the tone and the integration, the aesthetics integration is better. It happens more. So I think this is just a thought, but it's something for artists in general. Something else that struck me, it's overwhelming for me, it's the number of lives, the number of meetings and conversations through the digital world, such as this one today, and the number of disabled artists and also the professionals from the accessible resources industry market. I can't. It's like it's an explosion of people exchanging ideas and also demanding more policy making. The laws in Brazil to protect or to allow everyone to have the same rights, the law dedicated to disabled people or to disabled people's rights is really good. It's a law that was written and devised by people who were really keen on the social model of disability. Since 2008, we've been developing those laws. In 2015, we implemented it, the Brazilian law of inclusion, and it's really good and complete. But it's also open, as it should be. So the interpretations sometimes make us feel less protected. So I think Claire covered a lot of the issues and problems or solutions that we may find when we are producing internationally pieces that have the resources embedded. I love guide dogs, and I always dreamed of bringing this to Brazil, this piece. And I was thinking about all those questions, because to produce it in Brazil, it requires a huge investment, because we have to make it accessible to this to the Brazilian audience, taking into account all the aspects she covered. So this is something for us to think when we are devising a piece, which is really helpful. Something else which I like, it's an aspect I like a lot, is that more training for sign language interpreters and audio describers are popping up as well. So this will make the sector go through a huge transformation, I imagine and I hope. So I think this is for now, and I'm open to the questions when we open for that, and I'm really happy to be able to share my reality with you. Thank you.